Alright, get that up.
Your show will go live in 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1.
Discover what's really going on in the stream video.
Now we can see a new world.
Listen live or listen to a live selection of archived programs. TruthRadio.com. The truth is out there.
Now we can see a new world coming into view. A world in which there is a very real prospect of a new world order. The new world order does not mean surrendering our national sovereignty or forfeiting our interests. He took an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States of America. By some, he's been called controversial. How can I convince you when your ears refuse to hear? You turn your heart away from me each time when I draw near. Your eyes refuse to meet with mine, they glance away in fear. Now, keep in mind that some of my guests have been approached by Homeland Security or FBI saying, why are you going on the Clay Douglas show? My message to those guys, if they're listening this morning, is go get a cup of coffee. Maybe you'll learn something. We both took the same oath. Okay, to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I don't recall there being an expiration date on that. He is the free American, Clay Douglas. That's the Free American, weekdays at 7 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Eastern. Every time I think about the damage that's been done, the anger runs inside me till I'm almost overcome. I want to tear the moon out of the sky and up the sun. For the podcast and more details, visit www.freeamerican.com or catch the podcast by phone by calling 832-999-8621.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of the Free American. I'm your host. I'm Clay Douglas. My guest today is Gary Hunt, and Gary has been in this battle for at least as long as I have. He was there reporting on Waco, trying to wake the American people up. He's been doing that ever since. Hello, Gary. How are you?
Just fine, Clay. How are you this morning?
Well, I'm doing well. They still haven't managed to kill me yet, so I guess I'm doing okay. There's several areas that I'd like to cover with you. We've got 2 hours, so we ought to be able to do it. We've kind of been reporting on the Bundy affair, and the information coming in is a little sketchy. We got a lot of people trying to either trying to help or trying to take credit. Sheriff Mack from the Constitutional Sheriffs and Police Officers Association, he stirred up a little bit of controversy by suggesting that he wanted to put women at the front of the lines. We've had other stories that have appeared that multiple militia members were arrested at the Bundy Ranch. And frankly, I'm not sure how many so-called militia ever showed up. People did show up, but that could have been local people, that could have been family members, that could have been friends of the Bundys. They've got quite a few. And you're in touch with the Bundys. And that's, I certainly would appreciate as much input and information as we can get here. Also, the Oathkeepers. The Oathkeepers are trying to get their little 2 cents in, and I've invited the leader, the founder of the Oathkeepers, to be on my show several times. He won't come in because, well, I guess he's Jewish and doesn't appreciate my stand on Israel. And of course, that neither does Colonel Harry Riley, who canceled. I had him booked on the 18th. He canceled and put out a notice to all of the so-called Operation American Spring that I hated Jews and that they weren't to come on my show. I believe that's just a way to take away any support and try to keep me from having enough of an income here to get on the scene and be able to report from the scene. Harry Riley appreciates Israel, and the reason he's going after Obama is supposedly, according to his letter, Obama's treatment of Israel, Obama's support of the Palestinians. And now we got Operation American Spring, we've got the Oathkeepers, we got Sheriff Mack. Who's the good guy here? Who are we fighting for, Gary? What, you've been in this since Waco, as I have. I started the militias, or at least ADL gives me credit for starting the militias, because I didn't want to sit back and watch something like that, like Waco, happen again, without, and watching it on TV. I didn't want to do that. What's going on?
Well, there were militia there, and generally they came from the states nearby because of travel distance. There were people that came from further away, but Arizona sent a number of contingents up at different times to help maintain the force there. Montana sent people down, some from Nevada, and so the militia has shown up. As far as exactly how many, it's hard to say. They've had up to 80 or 90 people in the militia camp at a time. I think the last report I got three days ago is they still had about 60. So the militia has shown up, and you know, people tried to compare this to Ruby Ridge and Waco, and there were distinct differences between those other two events and this one. And this needs to be understood because we're not at the level that we were for Ruby Ridge and Waco. Ruby Ridge, they had an arrest warrant for Randy Weaver. Waco, they had an arrest warrant for David Koresh. In this instance, the court order allowed the BLM to go seize the trespass cattle off of the trespass lands. So all they could do, their only permission, it did keep Bundy from going on the trespass lands, Clive and Bundy specifically. But there was no criminal charge associated with anything. So all they could do is go down and arrest the cows that trespassed on government land. So they couldn't even go on the Bundy's property because of that. If the cattle were back on Bundy's property, they were not on the trespass land. So we didn't have the SWAT team mentality of go in with guns blazing, shoot the dogs, and kill whoever you can mentality that we had in the previous events. So the government's probably learned a lesson from what happened back then, and the proliferation of militia organizations back from '93 to '95. So this is a lot more casual in regard to, it was simply to arrest the cattle.
Well, obviously the cattle are the bad guys. They got horns, right?
Well, yeah, except the little ones.
Well, they killed the cattle.
Were hiding behind their children. Remember?
Yep. The cattle were. What was the purpose of killing them? I mean, they raided it right after the calves were being born, and so they killed a lot of the calves, and they killed a lot of cattle. They brought in bulldozers to bury them. I've got pictures of this unearthed. What was the reason for that?
Well, there were calves of various ages, but for example, one of the footages came off the ranch, shows a mother. The udder's full, and this is 2 days after I call it the unrustling, because they were rustling the cattle, and the Bundys and their, the militia, these people unrustled the cattle. They took them out of the rustled condition. But there was a cow with full udders, obviously feeding a calf, but there was no calf around 2 days later, and calves hang to their mothers. I lease the pasture out here to people with cattle, and I get to watch the characteristics of them, and they don't get far away from each other. And she'd been wandering 2 days without a calf, so hers obviously died. Whether it was a young calf, when it runs out of energy to run, like a deer, it'll find a shady place and hide and let the events go on around it, and if it's not fed, it'll eventually die. Other cattle, the adult cattle, were actually run to death. A little background on the contract rustlers. Shane Sampson and Cameron Warner were contracted by the BLM to gather, to round up the cattle. Now, interestingly, in trying to find out where the contract was, I talked to some people from Couture Roundup Company up in Utah, and they explained that these two, Shane Sampson and Cameron Warner, had worked for them before, and they'd worked on horse roundups and burro roundups, but never on a cattle roundup. So now the difference between horses and burros and cattle is that horses and burros love to run, especially horses. So you can take a helicopter and herd horses. They're used to running. In fact, I've got a horse in the pasture right now, and it runs all the time. I've got sheep in the pasture too, and the sheep run when the horse runs, but they run to get out of the way. But cattle naturally don't like to run. They're heavy, short-legged. They're not long-legged like burro and the horse. So these guys, it was explained to me that these guys had no experience in cattle roundup, and the lady I spoke to, quite frankly, was concerned. So they're using helicopters, and that was probably the cause of the death of some of the cattle. But then some were shot. 2 bulls at least were shot because they were a threat. Now this is these inexperienced guys, Sampson and Warner, not understanding that bulls aren't aggressive usually. That's for cartoons and bullfights. But I've had bulls in the pasture. I can walk up to them. They're not dangerous unless you pose a threat to them, or I don't know what circumstances caused it, but I don't think, as they pointed out in the video, there was no scuffing on the ground by the bull. It was just shot. If it was angry, it would scuff the ground, and there'd be evidence of its, on that desert soil would be a lot of evidence of its discontent with the situation, but there was none. It was just shot. How many were shot and how many died of exhaustion or other causes, dehydration or anything, I don't know. But there was no reason for the death of the cattle. And interestingly, whether it's filed or going to be filed or not, I don't know, but I heard talk, not through the Bundys, of a lawsuit because they violated the authority granted by the court order, which was simply to arrest the cattle. Now, I don't know how many of the listeners are aware of this too, so I'll go into it. It's kind of interesting that the judge issued an order without really thinking of the consequences, getting answers to questions. What do you do with rustled cattle, or arrested cattle, or rustled cattle? Let's go with rustled, that's the correct word. What do you do with rustled cattle? Well, if they some people have told me even county lines sometimes have restrictions, but definitely there's restrictions that are supported by both federal and state law that any cattle crossing state lines have to have 2 certificates. One is a health certificate, especially after the mad cow disease incidents of a few years ago. And the other one, to avoid rustling, is that there has to be a licensing certificate, and the owner has to take off. So there's 2 inspectors involved. One is the health certificate inspector, and one is brand inspector. They apparently were provided Utah with the legal certification. And the auction house too has to verify that. It's kind of like, in a way, it's like you have a certificate of transfer ownership. So the auction house would be in the position of selling rustled cattle, excuse me, which would be bad for their business, because the other cattle ranchers say, you sell rustled cattle, I'm not going to do business with you, because the certificate is wrong. And I don't say, I'm the capital and do something. But if I had to bail out on this when this started blowing up the auction house, they said, no, we're not going to sell the cattle. And then suddenly, should forward, they're not going to. I think the government very soft forward and not coming into the state. The apparent 2 inspectors said that they were the law after all. I started that a legal standpoint as a constitutional order that wasn't out by the judge. It makes it kind of interesting too, because the trouble will charges against Bundy. The judge did not want after it backfiring on the other judge over the rustling order. So that's an interesting back. You may have seen it in alternate made, I don't know. What led me to write those articles that we talked about, and you alluded to it a minute ago. The second article I wrote, I think it was on the Bundy Ranch, was April 16th, and it was called "The Bundy Affair, the Battle Continues." And this article is circulating agents, the undercover agents infiltrating the towns and taking arrests were made. I called him. He would know. This is a small community. You got the seasons going to build still to the Bundy Ranch. And if that has occurred, word would have got out and the ranch of Bundy and said, I told him stress me.
You're breaking up just a little bit, Gary. I don't know exactly what's wrong here. If it continues, take this number down. 646-915-8774. That'll put you right on to Blog Talk, and I can maybe that'll free up a little bit of Skype room here, and maybe you won't be breaking up.
A little more, I'll call in that number.
Yeah, let's try that, because you're breaking up. I get about every third word or something from what you're saying. Again, that number is 646-915-8774.
Want me to call that number too?
I'd like for you to hang up here and then call that number, and I'll bring you up on Blog Talk. You're already in the chat room there, so it should be just a direct connection.
Okay.
Did you get the number? Did, hopefully he did there. Okay, yeah, alright, that one got dropped. Alright, we'll see if we can get Gary Hunt back up. And I've got the links to these stories. It'll be a couple of more links for some articles that he's written here very shortly. Okay, Gary, I got you now.
Is it any better? Does it sound better now, Clay?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It sounds better here. It took one channel off of. Beg your pardon?
Clay, I cannot hear you.
You can't hear me? I should have you. Can you hear me now? Whoops. Wait a minute. Let me see. I've just lost. Where did I lose here? Okay, I got through. I lost Blog Talk. Let me bring Blog Talk back up. Okay, let me try something else here. Hold on.
I did not hear you press at least 4 digits of your... Using Blog Talk Radio.
Incredible here. Alright, won't let me in nothing here. Hang on a minute. Let's try to get it on.
Radio. Feed center left. Press the pound key.
The picture's not bad. Depending if it is not, and you have please enter your PIN. To start your show now, press 1. If you're important, it's...
Since it appears you're calling back into a live show, we're ready now.
So,
Alright, I'm back on here, Gary. We lost Blog Talk there on this end. Can you hear me now?
well, now that it's slowly, can you just tell that clearly? I'm not sure. What's that?
I don't know. It's really terrible here. We're breaking up. Keeps breaking up here. I keep losing the channel here. Evidently, they don't want us. The fusion centers must not want us talking here. But I can hear you now.
You can hear me now? Yes.
Yes, sir. I can.
At this point, or so on.
Can you? I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can now. Yes.
All right. We finally got a connection here. Hopefully it'll hold up. And pick up where you were just talking about the article that you did. The whole thing continued. Let me ask you one question aside here. What gives the BLM the right to charge a rancher for the grass their cows are eating on land that actually belongs to Nevada? It don't belong to the federal government. What's going on here? Where are they getting their rights to do this? The Bundys have been grazing on that land for 100 years.
Nevada State was in '64 during the Civil War, and it has an interesting provision in it, in that the people, the state of Nevada would submit to the superiority of the federal government, and then we know a lot of land was retained. Now the retained land, retained by the government, the retained land is a rather interesting and historically rather gray area. There are three different ways this country can be, the jurisdictions can extend to something like that. It's not under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 of the Constitution, and in a sense, it's not under Article 4, Section 3, Clause 2 of the Constitution. 1817 is force magazines, arsenals, seat of government, other needful buildings, and it requires seating by the state, which is not it's not in Article 1 where legislation is, but it does talk about what's required by the United States, and it says that the government will have the right to make needful rules and regulations over territories that are owned by the government. Now, when you begin the equal footing doctrine of the United States, the Northwest Ordinance, says you come on an equal footing with other states. But most of the Western states, after the Civil War, laws were kept by the federal government. The largest state, Nevada, 80 to 90% has been obtained by the federal government. Now, the question then comes to, well, what is their jurisdiction? It's not Article 1, Section 17, because it's states and jurisdictions, so it must be the one in Article 4, Section 3, Clause 2, territories and lands owned by needful rules and regulations. That's an interesting, the criminal authority over it, or does it just allow them to make certain rules? So anyway, that's about what happened in 1864. In 1906, the first grazing act that I could find written by Congress was the Grazing Homestead Act, where if you grazed land for a period of time and did certain improvements on it, you could acquire 640 acres, or a section of land, 1 mile square. Then in 1934, there was another grazing act that, among other things, would grant rights. It had no restrictions, but they could rights for grazing on the public lands. The land could be removed for a national monument, a national park. If they were going to build a national monument or national park, could, take away the grazing rights. I would produce the bill. It would be equitable, and they would be reestablished at a different location. then there was a provision added to the act when it was made into statute to help discretion to the would be the but never got to all the questions I had on the they didn't have the information readily available either. When did they start paying? Let's start paying. For 3 years, it's officially land and actually healthier for the tourists. But online, I think it was near 90s. Bundy was assessed a fee to gray cattle. It was based on my understanding is it was $1 a head when it started, but it jumped up to $3 a head. So that would be $2 or $6 a head a year. And he paid that for 3 headers. But at the same time, the government claimed that land under endangered. And the fee structure was such that it was supposed to be returned to improve the grazing lands, to put in water tanks, none of it ever came back. So the money was being paid voluntarily, he agreed to, but coming back around the circle to improve the grazing land. If the government's just going to control money and make sure there's grazing land, all they've done there now have done at been done at the expense of the private and Bundy. But when they found out about the trying to get this put under the Endangered Species Act in favor of the desert tortoise, and he wrote a letter to the Solicitor General of the United States. I think formal steps, but an apartment, then notified owner that I don't want to continue the lease. So he took the lip of saying I don't want the contract, but he continued to graze as he had before these incidents began to occur. And in '93, there was a friend of mine was living in Las Vegas, and he had gone with a large crowd of people, similarly to Bundy, what was going on at the time. So here 20 years later, that was 93, that was 92 and 93, we got Ruby Ridge and Waco. Here 20 years later now, they've waited just long to do something because of their misjudgment in what they did back then, and I think their misjudgment in, I'd like to think, judgment in what they did the last couple of weeks, or another 20 years, but I'm trying to think that since they lost time that the game is on. Private hasn't paid the fees. People accuse him of trying what the desert tortoise, the cattle have been grazing on that land with coexisting with the desert tortoise for a long time. The tortoise is still there, so it can't be that bad. But in 1996, a university professor in Southern California did a study on the desert tortoise and its relationship to cattle. Well, let's go back and settle better. There were animals, deer, ravaging that area, and they were shooting up. And his study, after they were gone, it was probably harder on the desert tortoise. His study indicated that the cattle actually exposed towards a very digestive system, so it can't eat all the grass at all. It can chew it, but it just gets very little out of it. The sprouting grass, it can digest all around of that. Cow pie, the grass is already digested for the turtle. Now, turtles don't drink water as much as they get moisture out of the food that they eat, the grass and that. But a cow pie builds with over the top. Digestion. I've got 2-year-old cow pies out in my pasture. If I turn it over, they're still moist. We moisture, and there's a tortoise job can get food, vegetable matter. This whole desert system is a sham. It's an excuse for them to try and sit on it. And so that's the history. Now, then the court order comes because he hadn't paid the fees, which were never instituted until, I'm not sure, it was in the late part of the 20th century, at least, the 90s and 80s, I'm not sure exactly. But he raised, he went sitting in his beneficial use to support us. What should we leave land fallow when it can be beneficial? And that's one of the ideas of the in the Constitutional Convention will read out western boundaries of the states that found to the Pacific Ocean, especially Virginia, which was the last one to give up its western lands. That land east of the Ohio and west of the lines then gone for the boundaries of the states was public lands. It was to be sold to benefit the Treasury of the United States, and it could be given away as bounty for military service. So beneficial use in a purpose of public lands. And there's no reason that the government would rather idle and support some animals, which doesn't make sense. It's our land. It's public land. And, you know, there's another misnomer. We have been conditioned to believe that public means government. It didn't used to. Public meant the body of the people. It didn't mean the government. The government was strictly a caretaker of our land. So why should the government, being the caretaker, write rules on our land and tell us what we can and cannot do, and that we can't even go on it in many cases? And I guess that's about all I have to say about the grazing rights. You know, the government is just equalized into oblivion. It used to be retained from Americans.
Gary, I have said that any time a communist regime, according to history, any time a communist regime has taken over a country, they go after 3 classes of people in order. They go after the farmers first, the self-sufficient family farms, and I would include ranchers in there, because they don't want you being able to feed yourself. They go after the intelligentsia second, anybody that's smart enough to know what they're doing, and third, they go after the veterans and law enforcement that are still loyal to the old regime. In this case, that might be the so-called Oathkeepers, but that's another conversation we'll talk about in a moment. But isn't that what's happening? Isn't this a war on
I'm having trouble hearing you again.
Yeah, it says I'm breaking up terribly here. I don't know. I don't know what else to do here. Everything has been working here fine for months. Doesn't show any problems here, but can you hear me now?
I can now. I wonder, are you using a headset?
No, sir. I'm not using a headset.
Well, you're right now.
It just breaks up sporadically. It breaks up sporadically, and I can't tell why. Let me...
You broke up just then. I didn't know. Make a sip.
Okay. I don't know, I got no idea what to do. They say I'm breaking up terribly here. Let me try another computer here. So give me a couple of minutes here to transfer over to another computer, and we'll see if the sound gets better.
Okay.
All right. We'll call you right back.
No, I'm on the
I'll
Blog Talk.
I'll call Blog Talk back here on another computer
okay.
in just a second here. I'll also bring Truth Radio and Crusade up, so just be patient with me here, folks. I'll be right back.
Welcome to Dog Talk Radio. Our radio has come and finished with the announcement. Please now, check the calendar. Into Blog Talk Radio. Please enter.
To start your show now, press 1. To hear important...
Since it appears you're calling back into a live show, we're reconnecting you now.
Oh, nobody ever thought
All right, I've got you here, Gary. My guest is Gary Hunt, and I believe I've got you up, and I've got you on another computer now. Can you hear me better now?
Yes, I can hear you better now, Clay.
All right, you're clear too. So let me bring up my other channels here, but we can hear you now. Oops, let me find this.
You ought to chew out that technician. He's screwing things up.
Yeah, I'm the technician. I do that every day.
Oh.
I was just trying to tell people I don't have any help here. I do this all by myself. I lay the magazine out. I do the websites, and I do the radio show. Just out of curiosity, what is your take? This is an aside here. While I'm still bringing up Crusade and Truth Radio, let's do that now. What is your take on Operation American Spring? I don't understand why the day he was scheduled to come up, why Colonel Harry Riley suddenly became a pro-Israel type guy, and hated me for doubting he put Obama down for some sympathy he showed for the Palestinian movement. What's going on with, in your opinion, of Operation American Spring? Is this another false flag? Are they trying to bring unarmed patriots into Washington, D.C., or what?
First about Israel, I have no problem with people supporting Israel, which is not with my money or taxpayers' money. If they want to send their money to Israel, that's fine. That's their choice. They can send it across. They can send it to, make Manuel Noriega stay in prison better. I don't care. That's their choice. That's called freedom of speech. But to take my money is where my objection comes in, and our government and our lives supporting Israel. Now, Operation American Spring is modeled after these very destructive, but in some cases effective events that are happening in Muslim countries. What a bad name. But, Clay, you and I are old enough to remember the 60s and the blood on with the anti-war movement for about 10 years. And it took 10 years of massive demonstrations, and what you see in this country today pales in comparison back in the 60s and early 70s. So, can it be effective? The government's not. Well, we got to say, Richard Nixon came out on moratorium in November 1969. Went to the Lincoln Memorial and talked to some veterans. There were some people that were protesters that were there, and then he began winding down the road. But it took him 2.5 more years to end the war. But that was the beginning of it. So the effectiveness of something like Operation American Spring has proven to be insignificant in terms of government. Probably where it serves the best purpose is those that go to Operation American Spring are going to realize the futility and realize that it's going to take harsher means to return the government to constitutional limitations. So it'll serve a good purpose, even though it in itself is not going. I don't think it's going to serve a purpose at all. Now, there's something rather consternating about it. I've talked to a few people that claim that the idea is to carry arms. Well, it's illegal to have arms in Washington, and I think it's within their jurisdiction to do that because of Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17. Exclusive legislative jurisdiction seems to give them the ability to ignore the Second Amendment. Whether it's legal or not, that's another question, but the fact is it is. So if people cross the bridge with rifles shouldered, it doesn't matter how they're carrying them, even empty. If they go into Washington, you know, you got a rifle stand in this line, you're going right into the cage. But they say, well, they're advertising no firearms, but people are believing, apparently the people I talk to, believe they're supposed to take their firearms. And if they do, if they use them, it'll be a bloodbath. If they don't use them, they're just going to end up in jail. So those people that think that taking a firearm to D.C. is going to serve any useful purpose, I think have risked themselves their future safety.
I agree with that. And Adam Kokesh showed the futility of that kind of protest. But
yeah, when he snuck in and got a 15-minute shot and then put his gun away real quick because he was afraid of getting arrested. He knew he would. Right.
Well, whether or not that they're only going after the Harry Riley put out a hit piece, editorial about Obama, and it was, while he's accusing me of hatred of Jews or anti-Semitism, I mean his rap about Obama could be used by the Secret Service to basically charge almost anybody that's marching in that circle with threatening the president. I mean, he threatened the president. I've got his whole little editorial up on my website, freeamerican.com. But we'll see how it turns out. Hopefully it's peaceful. Hopefully nobody will get, we did have a million bikers show up for that million Muslim march. 21 showed up. We had a little over 1 million bikers show up. They didn't want to give them a permit, and they basically said, we don't need no stinking permit, and went there anyway. So, and that, they didn't accomplish much. Nothing changed, but hell, they had a good time, and they'll have a good time afterwards because after Operation American Spring is over, we've got Rolling Thunder, and I've been supporting Rolling Thunder for 20 years in every magazine I had. It's a good time. The bikers get there, the veterans get there, and everybody shows a lot of respect. That event is worth going to Washington for. If Operation American Spring falls flat on its face, it doesn't matter. Now,
Well, it'll serve the same purpose. It'll educate those that go that they wasted their gas and nothing came of it. But that's what it is. A good show of unity. It does probably serves other purpose than to educate the people of the unsuccessfulness of the effort. Anyway, I was going to start to talk about Sheriff Mack. I think that's the next one that comes up. And
yeah, Sheriff Mack and the Oathkeepers. Because I was very interested in your article on the difference between the Oathkeepers and the militia. I lean towards the militia because the militia, technically, legally, is every able-bodied American between the ages of 18 and 45.
Or males in some states, but yes. Now, I had an email forwarded to me, and it didn't have much background on it. It said, folks, we need your help to dispel a terrible rumor that was started by one of our own. Sheriff Mack thought it would be a good strategy to put women and children up front in the confrontation between the Bundy family and federal agents. Because he said that, it has now become the narrative that the Bundy family actually did do that. I have had two of the women send me statements that they are trying to get out in order to undo the damage caused by this unfortunate miscalculation on the sheriff's part. Please help the ladies right the wrong and send the statements out to everyone, asking them to do the same. And it was signed by Kelly Townsend, who was active in the Tea Party and is currently a representative in the Arizona legislature. Then the first statement, as a woman writer on Saturday, I can confirm that the statement was untrue. In fact, it was opposite. We were told to stay at the rear. If a shot was fired, we were to ride as fast as we could for safety. The women did not approach the gate until the BLM had dispersed and Metro had arrived. These were officers of our community that we knew and trusted. Otherwise, we would have remained where the Bundy men told us to stay. The Bundy men are protectors and would not have allowed any harm to come to us. We were there on our own accord for the freedoms of our children, and that's signed by Brianna Bundy. The other one is, to whom it may concern, I would like to put an abrupt stop to the rumor concerning the speculation that women and children were strategically placed in the front of the protest against the BLM on Saturday, April 12th. I was one of 5 women that was on horseback that day, and never was I asked or told to stand at the front of the pack. The cavalry of horses was stopped by members of the Bundy family that were also riding before we dropped off the hill into the wash in order to have a prayer. There we were asked, once we entered the wash, to spread it into a straight line and stand as a united front. We were asked to be Christ-like and reverent. We were asked not to taunt or yell obscenities. As a woman, I chose to stand with the Bundy family. I chose to ride into that wash alongside my husband and my friends in order to stand for something I believe is right. And contrary to the current rumor, I was instructed that if anything were to go wrong, I was to turn my horse around and get somewhere safe as fast as possible. I think I can speak for most of the women in that wash on Saturday when I say that standing alongside the Bundy family, not in front or behind them, but with them, was a choice we made that day and would make again. Thank you, Haley Crandall. Now, I'm not sure if Haley Crandall, if she's a friend or not. But anyway, when I received this, I don't pass on things unless I verify them. So I called Kelly Townsend. I talked to her back in the days of the quartzsite situation in Arizona. And so I called her and asked her, and she said yes. That she received those, and what Sheriff Mack was saying was incorrect. Now, Sheriff Mack, what he was saying was that we had a strategy session and decided that we should put the women up front and children up front. That way, if the BLM fired, we would get good press out of it. This is from Sheriff Richard Mack. Now, I'm going to back up a little. Richard Mack was in Graham County, Arizona, back in the early 90s when the federal government wanted local law enforcement to do background checks for gun purchases. Sheriff Mack resisted that. He said, I'm not going to do the background checks unless you pay me for it, because I don't have the resources to do it. He won in court. So all he did is challenge an unfunded mandate on him. And now that's good. I spoke to Mac way back then about that story. But when I posted this on Patriot Action Network, I think it was, Patriot Action Network. Now, Darla DeWald is well known in the Tea Party movement. She's a good-looking blonde woman. She's running for representative in Arizona now as well. She's Tea Party, dyed-in-the-wool Tea Party, and she's an aspiring politician. And she said some good things in the past, but I was extremely surprised when, after I posted this article, she jumped into the conversation and said that she spoke to Richard Mack, and that Mack said the meeting was only, the strategy session was only between CSPOA, Constitutional Sheriff's Posse of America, that nobody else attended that meeting, no family, no supporters, no militia. Subsequently, I talked to the militia liaison, and he said he heard they were going to have a round table, and he was going to go to the round table, and he was told that he was not invited. So it was these constitutional sheriffs that developed this strategy. I don't know what for, because they never tried to present it to the crowd, as was apparent by the statements of the two women there, Brianna and Haley. So was it a ploy for Richard Mack to have a reason to stand in front of the camera? Well, the consequence of it was a number of articles laid that strategy not on the constitutional sheriffs. Mack's the one that brought it forward, but they used it as a broad brush to paint the entire contingent of supporters of the Bundys. So this was if I was the enemy, I would have loved to have been able to insert that type of propaganda, that broad brush painting the evil, sinister concept of putting women and children in front. Now let's go back to Waco. The government accused the Davidians of hiding behind their children. Their children were in their home and in their church. Wait, let's go to 2 years later. Let's go to Oklahoma City. The GOA, almost a year before the Murrah building bombing, had recommended the child daycare center be removed from the Murrah building because it was not built on the anti-terrorist standards, where they have massive concrete sloped walls coming up to the building. All the newer ones have these designs where there's no direct access by vehicle. You can't go up the steps. You can't hit the side of the building. You can't get close enough. If you have a bomb, these concrete will deflect the blast. But Murrah building wasn't like that, so the recommendation was to remove the daycare center. However, when the building collapsed, the government hid behind the children, saying how evil. There was a daycare center in that building. So the government uses children more than anything, and what Mack did was to complement that government attitude of using children to either their benefit or to the chagrin of the other side. And so it was stupid of that to occur, and any respect I had for Sheriff Mack went away with the article that I wrote about it. That's the Who Was Not in Front article. Now, you want to go to Oathkeepers now?
Yeah, I'd like to go to Oathkeepers. Yes, sir. I would like that. Because Stuart Rhodes, I've been to events, supported the Oathkeepers, got a T-shirt, and that's what I've always told people. I took an oath to the Constitution when I was 17 years old. There was no expiration date on it. But
right,
I am not real comfortable with the Oathkeepers. Go ahead.
Let's look at what their purpose is. Their purpose is, we will not disobey. Let me find it. We will not disobey any unconstitutional orders. And in their purpose, they even say warrantless searches. So what they're doing is, we're not going to protect people against the Constitution. We're not going to tell other people they have to obey their oaths. We are just not going to ourselves, we're going to disobey any unconstitutional order. So it's very specific to the individual in Oathkeepers. It's not a militia. It's not going to say we're going to get our Constitution back. It's not taking their oath really to heart, going after the domestic enemies. They're just talking about their own position in this. We will not obey unlawful orders. And as I said, one of those is warrantless searches. This is in their purpose. But wait a minute. My favorite people arrested for resisting arrest. Well, what were they being arrested for when they resisted to arrest them? And then they searched them. Look at the roadside. You know, cops are being trained. When you tell them you're free to go, they'll say, "Oh, by the way, can I search your car?"
Hold on just a second. Hold on just a second.
Won't tell you. At Truth Radio, you can listen live or listen to a large selection of archived programs. TruthRadio.com. The truth is out there.
All right, we're back. We're back here.
Okay, so warrantless searches, they're taught by the police departments and the sheriff's departments that if you stop somebody and you've broken tail light, here's your ticket, you're free to go now. Oh, by the way, can I search your car? Well, best thing is to say, the best answer there is to say, did you say I'm free to go? Because if you answer yes, they can search your car without a warrant. If you answer no and there's any suspicion in your answer, they can judge that you're trying to hide something and search your car. So the law enforcement officers, from what I understand comprise most of the Oathkeepers, are constantly violating their oath to Oathkeepers to not obey unconstitutional laws by searching people's cars without a warrant. And again, specifically in their purpose, they say to conduct, such as orders to disarm the American people, to conduct warrantless searches. So they're hypocritical in that. In fact, they kicked me off their Facebook page. They asked me to leave when I went to get back to leave. I found out I couldn't get back there anyway. So I guess they kicked me off after they asked me to leave because I was challenging them both on arrest and searches because this is blatant. However, theirs is specific. It's not to protect the country. It's not to protect their neighbor. They will not obey unconstitutional orders. That's it. That's all they stand for. Now, hey, that might be well and good, but does that make them patriots? I don't think so. In fact, I think there's a lot of them in there. Many of the patriots that have been busted over the years have had infiltrators come in from local law enforcement, participate in discussions, and sometimes suggest ideas and provide materials to these groups, and then he turns around and testifies against them when they go to court. So the question arises, what was happening is there was a large Oathkeeper contingent there, but there should be a relationship between Oathkeepers and militia, which is tenable because the militia is there because they believe in the whole Constitution. It's not so much a matter of oath, even though most of them have taken the oath, or many of them have taken the oath and will stand behind it. It's not because they work for the government and they will not obey constitutional orders. The fact is they don't work for the government and they want to stop the tyranny that's creeping over the land. So there's a disparity in purpose between the two organizations, the militia and the Oathkeepers. And the article points that out. And then there's things like officer safety, and then them or us mentality. Them or us mentality began being taught in 1967 in the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department SWAT school when it opened. And it was a statement that I used to have, but I've lost all my stuff. But Maureen Heaton, who's now dead, had provided me a copy of the training manual, and it said, who can be a criminal? I'm paraphrasing it. Well, it can be an ex-convict, a disgruntled employee, and went on and said, or even your neighbor. Now, that was in 1967, or even your neighbor. That was the creation of the them or us mentality, which is manifest in law enforcement today. It's them or us. We're the superiors, and if I tell you to do something, you'd better do it. If you don't, you're going to suffer the consequences thereof, including beating to death, me shooting you, or arresting you. They are superior. They have a sense of superiority because of the samurai mentality. And what we've seen more recently is the old fire a warning shot before you shoot anybody, which goes back to the 50s and before then, is right now officer safety is paramount. If there's a shooting in a school, they wait. Well, the best example is the theater in Colorado. No cop went in the theater until they amassed a force of over 40 officers, all battle geared to go into the theater. Officer safety was paramount to saving the lives of those that they might have stopped from being shot had the first officers on the scene entered and taken on the situation. But officer safety is more important than that. Their survival, screw the public, their survival is paramount. So these are the guys that we want to associate with, because are they going to drop that mentality when the ball starts rolling, or are they going to continue that, and then are they going to come into the militia and say, look, we're law enforcement, and we know a lot more than you, we're better trained and all this shit, and so you listen to us. It's a scary thought. And so I wrote this article for us to regain perspective. And as I mentioned earlier, in that one article, the 16 arrests, psychological warfare has begun. The playing field is new, and so the militia has to be extremely careful on what open doors they might have to people like, oh, you're an Oathkeeper, yeah, come join us. Is the guy an infiltrator? Does he feel superior? Is he still getting a paycheck from the enemy, the government?
Well, let me break in here for just a minute, because the ADL gave me a lot of heat. They listed me in armed and dangerous, Southern poverty law, listed me in false patriots while I was working with a presidential candidate for starting the militias. They blamed me and the Free American for starting the militias, and I'm totally guilty. But I started the militias in the governor's office, Governor Gary Johnson, who just ran for president on the Libertarian ticket in the last election. There was it was certainly the militia. We just trained in, use of handguns, the use of rifles. We trained on the NRA field there with professional firearms trainers. My sons were there. By the way, they outshot all of the all of the rest of the volunteer militia. But in Texas now, the Texas State Militia is working with the sheriffs. So at least I assume they're constitutional sheriffs, regardless of Sheriff Richard Max failings. They're trying to do things right. They're trying to do it properly. And the psychological warfare, that started with me, and of course it started with Oklahoma City. Timothy McVeigh was still in the Army when they sent him in to infiltrate the militias up in Oklahoma. And when he died, he was still listed as an employee of the U.S. government, if he died at all. I have my doubts about that. But I think probably the brightest news on in the country right at the time, the biggest step towards restoration of the Constitution, is the legalization of cannabis in Colorado and Washington and possibly Alaska. To me, if a cop can walk up to you, what's that you got in your pocket, son? What is that smell like? Marijuana to me. Whoa, you're going to go to jail. You're going to work for IBM for 25 cents an hour for the next 3 or 4 years. That is a police state, and ain't a good thing. Ain't a good thing. I mean, to me, the best thing for this country, we put more people, the government has put more people in prison, more Americans in prison than any other communist country out there. We percentage-wise, we put more people in prison than communist China, and they're working in the prisons. Arizona even put an ad out. We make more than a license plate in our prisons. What about that? What about that? I mean, I think they ought to abolish all the laws against victimless crimes. If you want to kill yourself with heroin, do it in your bedroom or in your bathtub or something there, so we don't have to clean up too much of a mess. But why should we incarcerate somebody for something they put in their body?
I don't disagree with you on that, but let's get back to Oathkeepers.
Go ahead.
Working for the government in the capacity of law enforcement or military. No police department in 17 cents. So the police wore red coats, and they were paid by the enemy. And so anybody, especially law enforcement, which is the role that the redcoats were playing in Boston, is working for the enemy. Would you join with the redcoats to overthrow Parliament and the King's control in the country? So if we put it in a historical perspective, why would we want to associate with these people? Now, it is true some redcoats defected and went to the American side. Some of the Germans did too. But they defected. But I'm sure that they were isolated from any sensitive information in any command unless and until they proved their worth to our side. And I think the reason for this article, we need to be very critical of people in Oathkeepers. If they come individually, take them in, but keep them in an environment where they don't have sensitive information, where they don't have command, where they can't create a problem until they've proven themselves. Now, in a conversation, now the Oathkeepers and Militia have raised the highest visit count on the Constitution Club and Ning site, and Patriot Action Network has picked it up too, and there have been some discussions there that have brought out some interesting thoughts. And another one is, what happens if you have an Oathkeeper unit? Well, that's fine. Let them fight their battle and we'll fight ours. If they prove themselves, if, for example, they start shooting cops that are attacking them, it's just like, you know, when the undercover cops bust a prostitute, they can't take advantage of the prostitution. They can't violate the law. It used to be that if you asked them if they were a law enforcement officer, they had a legal obligation to answer that. That's been taken away. So if they demonstrate that they're really on our side by fighting as a unit independent of us, then that unit might be absorbed in if they've actually fought a battle.
Let me
before there's a blanket acceptance of Oathkeepers, individually or as a group.
Let me go back. You mentioned earlier about Vietnam. I volunteered for Vietnam, but I didn't go. They tried to kill me before I got there. And when I lived through that, as soon as I got out of the Army, I started selling peace symbols. You know, I know that the war was another lie, just like Desert Storm. I know that the Gulf of Tonkin didn't happen, and but you should never say anything about our veterans in front of me or within arm's reach of me. Now, I considered myself an oath keeper because I took an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And we probably got more domestic enemies than we do foreign ones. How can you separate the two? I don't have the affinity for cops. It's not their job to protect us. And if you don't think we, do you get a warm, fuzzy feeling
Why
if
do
you see
they
a
put
cop?
protect and serve? Why do they put protect and serve on the side of the cars then? Are they lying to us intentionally?
Absolutely.
Or have they changed their nature?
I think they're lying to us intentionally, and many of our police forces have been militarized. They're driving tanks now instead of protect and serve cars. So they're dressed. I mean, look what happened in Boston. I mean, you got the police force is supposedly looking for a teenager, and they're pulling people out of their homes. I don't think that our police force is simply part of the protection of the bankers, just like the CIA and FBI. They're protecting the bankers. They're not protecting the people.
Well, let me have the floor again for a minute.
Go
I'm
right
a
ahead.
Vietnam veteran. I enlisted in the Army in 1964. There was very little news about Vietnam then, so what I got was all digested by the military. When I was at Fort Rucker, Alabama in aviation school, they dedicated the first new hangar to the first Huey crew chief that was killed in action in Vietnam. I had enlisted for Europe, and they tried to send me to Korea, so I went to orderly room and said, look, I enlisted for Europe, so I was held at Fort Rucker for 6 more weeks, and then we got assigned to Europe. As soon as we got to Europe, I put in a 1049, a request for personal action to go to Vietnam, because I was curious. I wanted to see what war was. And it took 25 months for them to approve that, so I had to extend my service time by 6 months to spend a year in Vietnam. I spent 3 years, 5 months, 4 days in service. I went to Vietnam. When I got back, all my friends were anti-war, and I was challenging them. But within a year, I realized something, the war was wrong, and I became a part of that anti-war movement, a very, very active part of it. So things changed. Now, I want to talk about one other thing. A good friend of mine and I were talking the other day, and he said, we have the same government that we had then, back in the 50s. No, we don't have the same government, because back in the 50s, Los Angeles Police Department started putting to serve and to protect. They did serve. They did protect back then. So what's happened is not that they lied. They're lying now, there's no doubt, because officer safety and them or us mentality came after the 50s. So the government has actually changed. We don't have the government that I was born into. It is so far from it that if you took the names off and showed the 50s government in this country and the current government in this country, you'd say, why aren't they at war with each other? They're so opposite each other. The transition has been in the government. It didn't start out as a lie, but it's become a lie. The intrusion into our rights, nobody would have considered telling you what light bulb or what toilet or what wood-burning stove you could or couldn't use back then. It's become insidious, and its administrative agencies have taken over the government. They've actually taken away from Congress and promulgated rules, not laws. They used to call them courts of justice, then they started calling them courts of laws. In fact, now they should call them courts of rules, because that's what we're charged with, violation of rules, not laws. So that's my 2 cents on those subjects.
Well, you know, they fought the War of 1812, I believe, to eliminate and lose the original 13th Amendment, which barred lawyers from serving in the government. And today we've got the
13th Amendment wasn't ratified until 1818, so it couldn't have been.
Oh, all right. Well, forgive me for that.
By the War of 1812.
Forgive me, but they did burn down the library, and the 13th Amendment disappeared, didn't it? Where did it have? What happened to that?
The
barring titles of nobility, and the Bar Association today.
Sleepy's in the chat room. Sleepy, would you put the link up to the titles of nobility PDF file? Brian March is one of the investigators. He was the 4th investigator back early on, and I met Brian in 1993 in Las Vegas when he lived there. He lives in Albuquerque now, and he had been doing research along with David Dodge, and I can't remember the other guy's names. One died, David Dodge, and the other one is still alive, I think, and Brian's alive. And so I got involved with Brian in assisting him in writing that one that we just linked in the chat room on Blog Talk that goes in great detail, but I might have the years wrong, but they were after the War of 1812, that the president then sent a message to all the states that were members of the Union when the 13th was proposed, and said we're one vote short of ratification. Virginia was one of those, and I think it was 1817 when he sent it out. Maybe it was 1818. But Virginia then turned around and published the 13th Amendment, the first publication we have, as law when they republished the Statutes of Virginia, or the Laws of Virginia. So that was tacit acknowledgement that Virginia, whose one vote would make ratification, whether they sent something to Washington and it got lost or not, the fact that they published it as ratified because they knew that their vote would ratify it is tantamount proof that it was ratified. And it wasn't until the 40s that a circular letter started circulating through the states. We don't know who wrote it. We haven't been able to find an exact copy of it, but by reference we have some indication of what it said, and it basically said the ratification of the 13th Amendment was done in error. And so it was the 1840s to the 1880s that this began disappearing. We found over 80 publications of it. In many of the earlier publications after the Civil War, the 14th Amendment is the anti-slavery. The Titles of Nobility Amendment is published as the 13th Amendment, properly, which is why it's called the missing 13th. The 14th Amendment then would be the 15th Amendment. But somewhere along the line, the circular letter took hold and people wanted to get rid of that, and it wasn't until after it was pretty much extinguished that the American Bar Association came into being, I think, in 1878. And all of a sudden, instead of being lettered in the law, you have to be a member of the Bar Association. So there was a transition, but it wasn't lost. Everybody recognized it. Every state recognized it for decades after the War of 1812. And that book that Sleepy has posted the link to.
Yeah, I've got it up here.
Will explain it in detail, showing documents, showing recent correspondence that is with congressional research people, Library of Congress people, and people like that. They contradict themselves in stumbling, trying to explain why it's not been ratified. So you have to judge for yourself. But to me, it was ratified, and is still a part of the Constitution.
Well, it's obviously the presence of lawyers in both the executive and the legislative and the judicial kind of makes that whole separation of powers break down, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, separation of powers, how many branches of government are there?
We'll post this.
What?
Yes, sir. I'm sorry. Repeat that.
How many branches of government are there?
I thought there were supposed to be 3: legislative, executive, and judicial, right?
Yes. Now, in 1946, and when I was talking about rules, not laws, in 1946, the United States the Congress of the United States, I think Cameron was the sponsor of the bill, enacted let me get the right wording here, the Administrative Procedure Act of 1946. I'm going to read you just a few excerpts from the congressional record. This is when they presented to Congress for We have set up a fourth order in the tripartite plan of government. But since that time we have set up a dimension, if I may so term it, which is now popularly known as administrative in nature. So we have the legislative, executive, the judicial, and the administrative.
So
now, I keep looking at my Constitution, waiting for this administrative branch of government to come into view. And I can't find it. You know, my Constitution is still the same as it was. So let me read. This is important to understand what's happening. Let me read something from 1936. The case was called Ashwander versus Tennessee Valley Authority. For those who want the site, it's 297 U.S. 288. Justice Brandeis, in a separate concurring opinion, he agreed with the decision of the court in the matter, said the following: the court developed for its own governance in the cases confessedly within its jurisdiction a series of rules under which it has avoided passing upon a large part of all the constitutional questions pressed upon it for decision. And then he lists the rules, 7 of them. Number 1, the court will not pass upon the constitutionality of legislation in a friendly, non-adversary proceeding, declining because to decide such a question is legitimate only in the last resort. 2, the court will not anticipate a question of constitutional law in advance of the necessity of deciding it. It is not the habit of the court to decide questions of constitutional nature unless absolutely necessary to a decision of the case. 3, the court will not formulate a rule of constitutional law broader than is required by the precise facts to which it is applied. That means they'll make it as narrow as possible. 4, the court will not pass upon a constitutional question, although properly presented by the record, if there is also present some other ground upon which the case may be disposed of. This rule has found most varied application. Thus, if a case can be decided on either of 2 grounds, one involving a constitutional question, the other a question of statutory construction or general law, the court will decide only the latter, the statutory construction or general law. 5, the court will not pass upon the validity of a statute upon complaint of one who fails to show that he is injured by its operation. Among the many applications of this rule, none is more striking than the denial of the right of challenge to one who lacks a personal or property right. Thus, the challenge by a public official interested only in the performance of his duty will not be entertained. Now, I've got to interrupt here. That would say that an SS troop that challenged the lawfulness of his activities under Hitler had no right to go to court and say, you're asking me to do something unconstitutional. I want to challenge that in court. The court would say, according to that rule, you have not been injured by it. So he couldn't even, you can't challenge an unlawful law unless you're injured by it. 6, the court will not pass upon the constitutionality of a statute at the instance of one who has availed himself of a benefit. Let's look at that one. This is interesting. So if I, on my W-4, say, I want to claim deductions for my dependents, I'm seeking a benefit. Now I'm bound by all of Title 26, the entire statute, the Internal Revenue Code, because I've sought a benefit from it. So I can't challenge the IRS if I've sought that benefit. Now that includes driver's licenses and many other things in our lives. The states have adopted the concept of administrative agency rule. Most states have administrative codes. Some incorporate all the statutes together, others break them up. So they've got criminal code, civil code, administrative code, things like that. The administrative code is the one that you usually charged with a crime under. 7, when the validity of an act of Congress is drawn in question, and even if a serious doubt of constitutionality is raised, it is a cardinal principle that this court will first ascertain the construction of the statute by which the constitutional question may be avoided. I hope you all digested that.
So basically, we've got a fourth form of government that's not authorized by the Constitution, that's put into effect by our attorneys, our titles of nobility. Are you friends? Are you friends with Sleepy Salsa? Do you? Is this a friend of yours?
Yes, he is.
Let's take a call from him then.
Okay.
All right. Hello, Sleepy. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for bringing me on, Douglas.
Go ahead.
And especially your folks were mentioning about the Bundy affair. Would that mean, therefore, that the Bureau of Land Management is an administrative agency?
Yes, it would. No, let's go back to something I said earlier. I said the 1934 Act gave the authority to remove grazing land for a national monument or a national park. Now, they're probably administrative agencies too, but that was enacted in law. But further on, and probably added later, I don't have the resources to go back and see when it was added, but, statutes are amended from time to time. And it also gave discretion to the Secretary of the Interior. The Secretary of the Interior and BLM is an administrative agency, and that's an administrative agency there. There was an administrative agency, BATF in Waco, the FBI in Waco. They're administrative agencies. And Congress will enact a general concept quite often, but they give the authority to make the rules to the agency itself. So the agency then has to list their suggested rules in the Federal Register, and then there's so many days for people to respond to what's in the register. It doesn't matter. I mean, that's just complying with the paper trail, and then they enact the rule unless there's very serious objection, and I don't recall any serious objection to any of these rules over the years. So all the formality is they have to publish them in the Federal Register, and absent an overwhelming objection, then after so many days they become rules, and they be entered in the statute. Just to go back further, back when I first started, this was back in the 80s when I first started, because the IRS started looking into things, in the inside cover of U.S. Code, there was a list of each of the titles, and some of them had asterisks next to them, and the asterisk represents positive law. Now, those are ones that weren't promulgated by agencies. They were functional to the purpose of conducting the business of government, but the rest, most of them had no asterisk. And so we can presume then that those ones without asterisks, which include Title 26, the Internal Revenue Code, are ones that are in part or completely rules promulgated by agencies. So the difference between the government in the 50s and the government now is the fact of the proliferation of these rules by administrative agencies that also have purse strings tied to them. If the state doesn't comply with low flush toilets or fluorescent light bulbs, they will lose federal funding. They're using our money against us.
Thanks for putting up that link to the 13th Amendment, Sleepy.
You'll find that the most thorough analysis of the whole thing, including from day one.
Sure, happy to do it. And also, one other thing I'd like to mention about Titles and Nobility Amendment real fast is that Brian March's work, that was done back in 1995. There's actually been movement on it by the government, but mainly to kind of suppress it. There was that one law article written in 1999 basically trying to, it's a bad attempt to debunk it. It didn't debunk it, it was a bad attempt. There was also a court case in 2005, whose ruling was partially based on that badly written law article. And then there was last year in New Hampshire, the New Hampshire legislature actually had a bill before them to vote on whether to formally recognize the Tolerability Amendment, but unfortunately that bill was defeated. So there's been some movement on it over the past 10 years and change.
Let me, I've got both of you up here. Let me ask you, you know, I published the Free American started back when I helped start the militia in New Mexico. And frankly, I get a little discouraged. I mean, we've been trying to do something, and the only thing I've gotten more attacks than I've gotten support, and I haven't found a group out there to support. Anytime I get in with a group in a community, there's 2 or 3, I guess you could call them trolls, that come in there to try to demoralize, to try to break up any attempt at education. And you know, even now, I get very little support, very few donations, very few. When I had the Free American in print, I printed 10,000 a month. I thought when I came to when I eliminated the Hearst paper and the DuPont ink companies, I would be able to reach more people on the internet than I did in the bookstores. That hasn't happened. Frankly, I'm getting pretty disgusted with the American people. When it's kind of like asking, who are we fighting for here? Are these people worth saving? Have they been dumbed down so much, or have they just bought into, you know, the propaganda of the television set? What? I'd like to hear some opinions. What can we do? I mean, we make a difference. The militias have probably made more of a difference in Bundy affair than the Oathkeepers.
Well, I wrote an article years ago called and find the link for it. What happens is you got hundreds of thousands of people going in your 50s that wreck their resources. And you can't educate. They want to hear about the Federal Reserve or the Freemasons, or, you know, they've got their focus point is not unrest in the constitutional government. Now, I plan for restoration of the constitutional government. I took on Blog Talk, and I'm going to divide and conquer now. But it's a tactic of government to keep us diverse, so that we can't consolidate our forces and have what's called the restoration of the constitutional government. And well, it's divide and conquer twice now. It's both in the blog and on the webpage. So there's 2 different URLs. Clicking on the page, you cannot. But people don't learn except the area they're studying in. To be honest. So I've given him a list of all. I've given him to all my links and put up "We the People and Factions" as too. I wrote an article called "Factions" about the principal faction has the restoration of constitutional, and there are factions out there that can be absorbed within that framework, and there are other factions not be absorbed in that framework, but those that can and need focus on the principal faction, restoration of constitutional government as written and intended. When I was writing that article, I realized there was something missing. What's foundational? Most people don't know what we want when we get the Constitution back. So I wrote, but who are we? Because this goes back historically and is documented by words of those days. Who we people are, because we've gotten so far away from that. And the Constitution hasn't been changed to the point of affecting that. It hasn't denigrated the concept that was in the founders. It's still there fundamentally in the Constitution, and that's what that article explains. Now, I'll grant you it's a lot of reading. It was a lot more research to prepare those articles. But they're worth the time to read if you're, you know, we've been around for a long time, Clay, but I've been watching, you know, how come things aren't working, just like you are, and trying to identify and provide means of overcoming those obstacles that have kept us apart for years. There's another one that's very important to understand in light of the current circumstances, and that's vortex. Vortex keeps us apart, and it's an insidious government plan to keep us apart. And so, Sleepy will probably get it in a minute. But it talks about informants and agents and how they infiltrate, what their efforts are. And this goes back, it starts out with a letter from 1972 by the Internal Revenue Service when they wanted to disrupt the anti-tax movement that was going on then. And they laid out in a letter in 1972, what was that, 42 years ago, they laid out how they were going to disrupt things, how they were going to attack the leadership, they were going to do all these things to try and destroy the anti-tax movement, the tax protest movement. That was 42 years ago. They probably perfected their style considerably, and now are doing it then, but they said use local laws, state laws, federal laws, whatever you can, try and take control of the movement, try and know what they're going to do ahead of time, attack their leaders, get them arrested if you can, if not, discredit them. You know, this plan was there 42 years ago in the tax movement. And that was a specific movement, but now we've got all these diverse movements, which are explained in Divide and Conquer. I think I listed 42 different movements. But until we come to a common focus, we don't stand a chance. Until we're all going in the same direction with a primary goal, we might have secondary goals. But all those secondary goals, if we get the Constitution back, they're going to be solved. Victimless crimes. No, they don't belong here. That's not the authority of the federal or even the state government to tell us how we live morally. The only government that can, as Jefferson said, is the one closest to us. A town can enact a law against prostitution or gambling or something like that. When I was surveying in Georgia in the late 60s, after I got out of the Army, we were doing work in a dry county. We could not buy a beer. Christmas Eve, we worked over Christmas. Christmas Eve, we went up to the adjacent county and drank some beer in a bar. When we left the bar, we took some beer back with us. This is how bad it is. We drank them back in the motel rooms. We put the cans in the garbage can. The next day, when we got back from working, the guy said, if I find any more beer cans, you're out of this motel. It's illegal to even have an empty beer can in a dry county, but the other county, you can drink all you want. So those local laws, the moral laws, can be applied on the local level so that we can have comfort within the communities that we're in. If we don't like prostitution, we can outlaw it. If we don't like drugs, we can outlaw it. Doesn't mean you can't come in stoned. It means you can't bring your pot with you. But the government is, originated that movie back in the 30s against marijuana.
Yeah, Reefer Madness.
Madness.
We used to go watch that in the Rocky Horror Picture Show at midnight and laugh our ass off, smoking a joint up in the balcony, you know. That
was a campaign that led to classifying marijuana as an illegal drug. At the same time, though, when marijuana went on the legal drug list, you didn't need a doctor's prescription for anything. The pharmacist actually has as much training as a doctor, but his is specific to drugs and reactions. But now they give doctors the prescription. The funds are smarter than the doctors in drugs. But back then, you could go down to the local apothecary or drugstore and buy cocaine or laudanum, which is heroin. You just walked in and said, I want a bottle of laudanum, and paid the guy and walked out. Marijuana, though, had to be taken off of his shelf. So that was really the beginning of the government trying to impose moral laws on us.
I've said that the drug laws and the war on drugs is really a war on our freedom. It's a war on American people.
Well, it's become the foundation for the police state that you mentioned earlier.
Yes.
Because all of a sudden, by taking something that God grows willingly, it grows, pot's easy to grow. Quite simply, put some seeds in the ground, water them. If you want to make them grow good, put nitrate on them, and seaweed really works real well because of the trace minerals. But it grows naturally, but to have it is illegal, and you can hide it on you, you can have it in you, and so they keep writing all these laws, making, well, the most recent one, if the cops are in an apartment building and they smell smoke, this is again warrantless searches, they smell smoke coming out from under your door, they can break your door down and search for the marijuana, and if they find it, they charge you with a crime. Where the hell is the warrant law enforcement officers behind that? But see, that became I haven't talked about the three constitutions yet, have I? I guess we're almost out of time. Let me try and get this.
We've got 15 minutes. You got plenty of time. You got plenty of time.
Okay, back to Oathkeepers.
And let me say one thing. Let me say one thing here, because later this year or during this year, I'm going to release a book that I wrote, science fiction book that I wrote 45 years ago about the United States in a future when all laws against victimless crimes had been abolished, and we returned to where you could go buy the laudanum, you could buy the pot off of the shelf of just about any store. And that was science fiction at the time, and nobody would publish it, but it's really what's happening now. And I'm not, I think medical marijuana is simply a way for the pharmaceutical companies to keep their hand in, to keep getting the doctors getting a little bit of money off of you. You got to bribe a doctor in order to get permission to smoke something God gave us. I have a little problem with that. But go ahead, Gary.
I do too. Let's go back to an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution. There are three constitutions, and this, surprisingly, my take on this, and I think it's a valid observation, came from a conversation with a former oath keeper. And the problem is when I take an oath to something, I have to know what I'm taking the oath to. So the three constitutions, the first one is the one the chief of police or the sheriff says is the Constitution. For example, what I just started to mention, there's one of the southeastern state Supreme Courts recognized that you can, if you bust the door down and bust somebody because you smelled the pot, you can arrest him and take the contraband and charge him with a crime. Well, my Constitution doesn't say that, but apparently he had reason to believe that his chief or police or gave him permission to do that, so he did it. It got tested in court. So the first Constitution, the one that most of the law enforcement oath keepers look at, is the one what the boss tells them they can do. And that's incrementalism because, oh yes, you can search their cars, but then the court tested it and said, well, there have to be certain conditions, so then they trained them to meet the certain conditions. So that first element, that misunderstanding of the gross misunderstanding of the Constitution, actually leads us to the second Constitution. Second Constitution is when these cases are tested in court, and the Supreme Court then, not what I read you about Ashwander, does not make a decision on constitutionality, they make a decision on the statute. So now the Supreme Court is rewriting the Constitution by making non-constitutional decisions, but promulgating that as law. They're passing it on to us. This is what we said about this, and we assume that if the Supreme Court said it, it's constitutional, but they said they're not going to rule on the constitutionality. So Constitution number 2 is the one the Supreme Court has deceptively given us. Constitution number 3, to those students in the Patriot community that really study the Constitution, is the one written by the framers and intended by them. And that's the one that's so obscure, but that's the one that they all theoretically take the oath to, but in fact they believe either the first Constitution or the second one, and they have no idea what's in the third one, the real one.
Michael Batarak, he was on my show shortly. The Constitution Club is trying to raise money to get him to go around and teach the Constitution, but then that begs the question, which one's he teaching?
Look, from the Constitution Club?
Yes.
Well, Keith Bonner's I've known for years, and we've had many conversations on the phone, and he's beginning to understand the concept of the three constitutions, but I think he's still stuck on Constitution number 2 to a large degree, because he recognizes some of the Supreme Court decisions. But my favorite Supreme Court decision is called John Bad Elk, 1899, and this is classic. John Bad Elk was in his home, and I think it was a marshal, sent 2 of his deputies, John Killsback and another one, to arrest John Bad Elk. There was no warrant, but they went out to John Bad Elk's house. They knew him. John, we're going to have to arrest you. We've got to take you in. John Bad Elk said, tell the marshal I'll come in the morning, or Monday morning. I think it was on the weekend. And they said, no, you've got to come now. Now, John Killsback and the other deputy were both armed. They had rifles. They hadn't raised them at all. John Bad Elk raised his rifle, shot John Killsback, and killed him dead. John Bad Elk was convicted in the state courts, and he went to of murder, and he went to the United States Supreme Court. I have the sign in front of me, but it's John Bad Elk versus United States. He went to the Supreme Court in the ruling, which was a ruling that law, if it's an unlawful service of an unlawful arrest, meaning an arrest without a warrant, that the only exception to having the requirement for a warrant was to stop the commission of a felony in progress, not after completion. Unless it's a lawful arrest, you have the right to defend yourself to taking the life of a law enforcement officer. And then the court went on to say that it was either a misdemeanor or no, what John Bad Elk did was either a misdemeanor or no crime at all. Now, I'm not sure what the misdemeanor part is, but it's not a capital offense to shoot a cop. 1899, that was based on Constitution number 3. What do we have now? You shoot a police dog and you can go to prison for life. What's the story here?
Well, that kind of supports J.B. Campbell's stand. It's he says if they're coming in to break into your home, you damn sure got the right to shoot them.
Well, even if they even if they even if they arrest you on the roadside, you have right to shoot them. They have no warrant. They have no right to arrest you. Fifth Amendment, no person shall be held to answer. Held, detained in jail, arrested. Answer, going to court. No person may be held to answer for any capital or infamous crime. Capital crime, obviously we know, death penalty. Infamous crime back then, if you look at it historically, it was what we call a felony now, and it was any crime that would result in a year and a day or more in jail. So you can't be held to answer for a capital or infamous crime or felony except under presentment or indictment by a grand jury. That's a jury comprised of the people. The only exception made in John Bad Elk is to stop the completion of a crime. That's my constitution.
Now, what about these grand juries? There are people, there are some organizations out there, I've had them on my show, that are promoting the citizens grand jury, and to me that seems to be the only answer. I mean, if the DA won't take the bankers to jail, won't take the politicians to jail, what do we have left except their people?
Well, the People's Grand Jury, some friends of mine spent up to 12 years in prison over that. It was Florida Common Law Court. It's on my webpage, Florida Common Law Court. They created a grand jury. There are a lot of grand juries created. They're not following the concept, but let's look at the authority to create a grand jury. There's this movement called the sovereign citizen movement, and there's another movement called the state citizen movement. The state citizen movement has validity. The sovereign citizen doesn't, because when we created the national constitution and our state constitutions, collectively, we the people, relinquished certain power and authority that we had and gave it to the government to administer. That's what the Constitution does. It gives them powers and authorities. So when we give them the power and authority to create grand juries in the Constitution, we have relinquished that right ourselves. Now, we have the Committee of Safety Common Law Grand Jury. It's different. Now, and this goes back to when I was in Waco. I talked to a guy in Louisiana that had looked into this, and there was, you might remember Judge Wampner in the People's Court. Now we've got Judge Genie and all these other judges. Those people sign an agreement, and basically they're going to arbitration. By signing that agreement to abide by Judge Genie's decision, that is enforceable in a court of law if they violate their agreement in arbitration, which is true of any arbitration, but arbitration requires the agreement of both parties. So in the Florida in the Committee of Safety Common Law Court Grand Jury, we only take cases not against people in government because we couldn't reasonably expect them to answer, but only take cases where it's one patriot charging another patriot with a crime, and then the grand jury reviews the evidence, prepares an indictment, sends it to the accused, and he can answer in the Committee of Safety Common Law Court in front of a petite jury for innocence or guilt. The grand jury is only probable cause, and we don't assume the authority to arrest or punish in that. So we're doing it within the law. Ours is irrefutable, but other as far as legality, but other ones where they issue arrest warrants, or they the grand jury is actually playing petite jury, and it imposes a penalty, $3 million for violation of your bond. Those people are assuming an authority that they relinquished in the Constitution. Not they, but their predecessors relinquished in the Constitution, and they accept that concept. So these common law grand juries that spring up all over, and I attended one in Ohio once, and it's really a joke, because everybody on the grand jury's mind was, except mine, they asked me, they felt that technically they had to have somebody from out of state. They knew I was from out of state. They asked me to sit on it. These people had their minds made up before anything was presented. The presentation took about 10 minutes, and then they wanted a vote from the grand jury. Well, I didn't raise my hand. I refused to. I can't go along with that. It's not proper, because we gave that up. The only way we get it back is returning the government to the authority that we have. Now, I've published, I've put on my webpage 2 articles that'll help understand this in petite jury, One was 1826, Lysander Spooner, essay on trial by jury, and the other one was from about 1906. I don't recall the guy's name right now, but he did a study on grand juries, and it's a PDF as well. And with those you understand, but you also understand that the grand jury, interestingly, used to belong to the people, but somewhere along the line, even by 1906, most states had made the county attorney, the state attorney, and the federal government has made the U.S. attorney in charge of the grand jury. Before then, it was left in the hands of the people. The judge, the sheriff, would fill the names out, and then the jury would elect their foreman, and then they conducted this whole thing by directing the sheriff to bring something forward, but not listening to the sheriff. The sheriff was not party. Now we've got the attorneys telling the grand jury what they can and can't do.
All right, we're out of time, Gary. We've got this up. This all of the links to your site and all of the stories we've talked about are up on my site. And folks, I've added a donation button on there, so you can donate $2 or $3 per month to get the magazine, and we'll try to get a lot of this information in the next issue of the Free American, the May issue, which actually has a lot of hope in there for you. Thank you. God bless you.
Mainstream media won't tell you.
We're out of
Are
time.
you frustrated with your elected politicians? Get the news behind the news at truthradio.com. At Truth Radio, you can listen live or listen to a large selection of archived programs on demand. Listen when you want to. Truthradio.com. The truth is out there. All you have to do is open your mind and listen.
And go to freeamerican.com and get the links to Gary's site. Thank you again. God bless you.
This is Martin News.